Dominic is the director of Montfort Center in Singapore. He has served as the provincial superior of the province of Singapore, Malaysia, and director of Montfort schools in the country, that is in Singapore, for a long time. He is a retreat director and counselor of the young, and he will speak to us on the specific Montfortan response in a post-pandemic world. Dominic.
Thank you, Rev. Varghese. So good evening to all of you, or good afternoon for some of you, and good morning for many others. Yeah, I'm glad that Varghese has granted me this opportunity to share with you this evening. Talking about Montfortan response, I suppose it's a challenge. I tried to go through it, and of course, Montfort has not experienced COVID-19. So I think our responses will have to be taken from our inspiration that we received from him. Yeah. What COVID-19 has done for us is it has changed our world, and our world has definitely changed and will continue to change. There's no doubt about it. So we know that this world that we experienced before this, or even earlier this year or last year, is not going to be the same again. And while we talk about recovery from COVID-19, we know it's not about going back to business as usual, but rather there'll be a new normal that we have to expect. So that itself, firstly, how different will our life and society be after this pandemic? What do we foresee in the post-pandemic era? What really will happen? It's really an unknown question, I must say. And how will these changes impact on the least among us? We talk about the last, the lost, and the least. The least among us, how are they being affected? I think it's been shared by some speakers before, so make my job a little easier. Yeah, and will these changes, or will this situation change the way we respond as Montfortians? How will it change us as Montfortians? So with this question as a backdrop, I will work on this as I go along. Yeah, how different will our life and society be? Firstly, learning and teaching will change, and so will schools be relevant anymore? Schools that we know up to now, will that be relevant for the future? You know, many places schools have been closed down. We have heard Brother Irudem earlier talking about the impact of that on schooling and learning and the children, and even some OECD talk about the impact of this will extend way beyond the decades to come, because the students who are in our schools now, when they go into the world of work, this pandemic experience will affect how they're going to respond to the world of work. And so that will affect our society, our economic and social environment. Firstly, also, no country can act unilaterally. We have learned from this COVID-19. No one can. Some tried. I know some presidents tried, but it's a total failure. They are now among the top 10 in the world. And therefore, what is needed for us is to act multilaterally, that we cannot work on all this all by ourselves. So to survive, we need to be interconnected, more collaborative than competitive. So collaboration is part and parcel. We may not look at big national or state level, but even just at an individual level, an individual institution, an individual community, we got to realize that we are highly interconnected. Doesn't matter where or which part of the world we are, there's this interconnectedness that we cannot run away. And COVID-19 shows us exactly that. Of course, we paralleled that earlier by our sister Kochirani, talking about how the planet Earth and all is, we are connected. We cannot run away from nature. We human and nature are one. Then the world of work will be transformed, and it will change how we educate our students for a job of the future. I think Brother Irudam has alluded to that a bit earlier. I think that has been something that we have to think about quite seriously. What are we teaching our children today? Are we preparing them for the Industrial Revolution 2.0 and at best Industrial Revolution 3.0? I think even Industrial Revolution 4.0 may not be what we are looking at as the world of work to come. Maybe it's an Industrial Revolution 5.0 yet to come. So what do we foresee in this post-pandemic era? First, the gap between different sectors of society will widen even more. We've already seen that income gap, which was widening, but the pandemic shows us that this is very wide now. In practically all countries, whether they are capitalistic or communistic countries, we are all experiencing that income gap between people, for example. And also, in response to a pandemic, people and countries will tend to be protectionist. Their approach will be more protectionistic than opening up to others. And we know that national and international response has been weakened through this pandemic. So it's now back to the people, the grassroots, to come together and do something about their situation. Every government, however we can see how big the country is, they are top on the list and they are grappling with this response, this pandemic. And we say that the recovery will likely be a W-shaped recovery. It's already being shown. That is no longer, we usually traditionally say it's a U-shaped recovery. It may take longer than usual, like the case of SARS that we experienced 17 years ago. The recovery was much shorter, but now it looks like the W is more than the W, it's a wavy recovery. We're already experiencing second spike in Europe, in many other countries. India, well, we're still spiking the first one. They're coming down a little bit, but they might spike up. But many countries in the region experience a second spike. And we think a third one will come, and the worst one will come after that even. So this is the reality that we have to confront ourselves with in this post-pandemic era. The gap between different sectors will widen. So it's not only income gap, but also our social relationship between people, different groups of people, different people from different socio-economic classes. There's a greater gap beyond just the wealth or the income gap. So, but firstly, income inequality in most developed countries has increased over the last 50 years from the Gini coefficient that's been reported. Practically most of the developed countries have experienced a widening income gap, or we sometimes call it the wealth inequality, not only income inequality. So thus the rule of business transaction has to change to ensure that the lower income group has a say in economic policies. Up to now, I think a lot of economic policies are determined by those who have the wealth, determining how it is going to be. And then income inequality is a process of economic growth, but the widening gap will lead to reduced trust, unrest, oppression, etc. I think some of our speakers have elaborated on this. Now, how will these changes impact on the least among us? This is one of my greatest concerns, and I think it's a concern for us as Montfortian. It says that migrant workers who were left stranded and living in deplorable conditions were badly affected during the pandemic. We see that in countries like Singapore, India. We've read a lot of reports of the tremendous and terrible effect on the internal migration from the north of India to the south of India to work, and the movement back when the window was open, but the tremendous effect on the people, especially the migrant workers, because they're not protected. They're left on their own. Their support system is not with them, it's back home, far away. So these are tremendous things that really worries us. School closure has also widened the gap in educational level between those in emerging and developed economies, different countries. Some countries has closed now almost for a year. I know in our context here, Philippines has closed for a very long period. Myanmar started a little later, but they also have been closed also for the most part of this year. Singapore schools have been open because the government insisted on that, and with great precautions. Yeah, but that again shows the gap that is happening between different countries. And so with economic fallout, it will have effect on issues of child labor and even child marriage. This is a report from the Nikkei, Asian Nikkei from Japan. There will be more incentive to work and earn rather than to study and learn. So children returning back to schools are not that promising. We see that in our schools in Philippines, where enrollment for the new academic year in August, the older students, fewer are coming back to school. The irreversible impact of COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 pandemic is like a strong natural disaster sweeping through our land. Nothing is left unturned. And unfortunately, this time it is worldwide. Almost hardly any countries were spared from it. So there are unknown questions of how the pandemic will change in our societies, or how it will change our societies. Will education move to being online more than face-to-face? Or will it be blended, as they will call it? Can we continue to work from home? Who are those most affected by not being able to work from home, for example? The people who are working in certain kind of labor work are not able to work from home. The cleaners, the waste collectors in our cities, they cannot work from home by operating a vehicle from their house. There's no way at all. Now, changing the way we respond as Montfortian, this is probably something that we now need to look at. First, will we move to the new periphery? Not the old periphery anymore. There are new peripheries that are being shown up now. Are we prepared to move to the new periphery? How do we survive the impact of the pandemic? Do we need to change the way we do our mission? Are we prepared to change our lifestyle to be relevant to the new era? Now, moving to the new periphery, Montfort says, those whom the world rejects must move you the most. So we are called to help those who are the most affected negatively by this pandemic, especially our migrant people among us, not only the migrant workers, but also refugees who could not return back or could not go to any other country, who have been locked down in their host country, and who were not supported. They'll be the last people that the country will be thinking of. They are least protected, and being far away has no immediate support. The low-skilled workers, the daily wage earners, and the frontline workers need our support as they face hardship from loss of income and employment, and social and family life. So the invitation for us as Montfortian is go where our deepest call is answering the greatest need of our world. So the call of our 32 or 32nd general chapter in Acts 5.3, call to have a prophetic age necessary to embrace the marginalized, critique the dehumanizing elements of the dominant cultures, counter gender discrimination, and offer alternative paradigms. To realize the Montfortian preferential option for the poor through well-considered plans, programs, and resources. I think when they wrote this, they did not think about COVID-19 yet, yeah. But I think the reality has set in, and it is a good call for us to make a response. Firstly, surviving the impact of the pandemic. COVID-19 has highlighted the world's biggest challenges of our time, climate change and mental health. It is said that 65% of our primary school children today will be working in job types that do not exist yet. According to Dell Technologies report, 85% of the jobs in 2030 have not been invented yet. So what does that say to us? So I think these are things that we have to look at. How do we go through this pandemic in the wake of the challenges that it is confronting us? Climate change and mental health. COVID-19 heightens for us that we are globally interconnected. That's what it is doing. And therefore, the issues, I think, has been explained by other speakers on climate change and more so on mental health. Because of the lockdown, a lot of people have gone through mental breakdown, depression, attempted suicide, and some have managed to commit suicide. Suicide rates has gone up. So human relationship is an important component of our human living. We need one another. Therefore, we have to be connected with other human persons. And because of this pandemic condition, we began to be isolated. I think speakers before me had spoken about that, especially the elderly, who are very much isolated on their own. And even the young, and even the not so young. I think we are all being affected by the lockdown, the isolation that we experience. And this can create mental health issues. Now, in our Montfortian Education Charter, I just quote two small parts. It says, as disciples committed with Christ in the struggle for the kingdom, which is from our rule of life, number 9, living in the world as members of the human family. So it reminds us that we are living in the world as members of the human family. We are all interconnected. So develop a culture of life and well-being in the educational milieu and programs so that students are enabled to handle situations of stress and personal crises with patience and maturity. I think Sister earlier talked about, the Malayali quote, that women should be as patient as the planet Earth, as the world. Okay, so maybe maybe not that kind of patience, but the ability to be resilient, to go through the difficulties, the challenges, the isolation that they're going to experience. So traits that's needed for us to be future ready. I mean, competencies for the 4th Industrial Revolution. We'll just kind of look at it very quickly. Firstly, personal skills. We need to develop this resilient and being resilient and nimble, or adaptable or flexible, to strengthen capabilities for responding to various crises and having the ability to implement them quickly, to respond quickly. How many of us responded to COVID within the first month or two? Or did we take 5 months or 6 months before we make our first response? So being resilient and nimble is very necessary. It says, to be transformed into a flock of peaceful sheep, a flight of pure doves and royal eagles, a swarm of honeybees, a herd of nimble deer, and the pride of bold lions. It's taken from the Prayer for Missionaries by Montfort, number 18. That we are called to become nimble as the deer and bold as lions, to be able to glide through or to be resilient in the midst of the pandemic. And now rule of life number 10 kind of invites us to look at, says, you are free and totally available. You can therefore be bold and dynamic and rush where God beckons to meet the urgencies of man's needs. And what is man's needs in this era, or this post-pandemic era that's coming, that's confronting us? Am I bold and dynamic to rush where God beckons? I think Montfort used this word rush quite a lot, He says that Mary is the spouse of the Holy Spirit, and where Mary is, the Holy Spirit rushes to the soul who has Mary in her, or hasten, sometimes some translator would use that in the true devotion to Mary, or the secret of Mary also. Next aspect is social skills, to support one another in their struggle, to break down the social isolation and to give human support, to develop collaborative skills and a bridging leadership, to be interconnected. We know that Montfort would organize people according to their needs into various confraternities in his time, in various places, in Poitiers and so on. He says he organized the Friends of the Cross, for example, the White Penitents, and also Association of Students, the brother of Blessed Mary Louise Trichet, Alexis Trichet. He organized them, and many other groups he has put together to really strengthen the community and strengthen people. And I think this is the time for us to organize people. This is a holy practice in order to safeguard and increase the good brought about by the mission. That's from the Sacred of the Rosary. Effective communication, love with your heart and hand and not simply with your mouth. Friendship which is only in speech is a ridiculous decoration. This was the guiding quote for our last general chapter. So authentic communication will be effective. If not, it will be useless. Learn to speak from the heart and to bring about action. If not, it is all emptiness. In the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, it shows up the materialistic and individualistic values of our age. Montfort is both a challenge and an alternative. It's a witness to an encounter with God in the concreteness of one's life and of history. So transit to the digital platform. If you don't take risks for God, you will do nothing great for Him. To change up teaching, to nurture thinking rather than to dish out instruction. Being locked down has gotten schools to move into the digital platform for teaching and learning. So the role of educator will need to move towards facilitating young people's development as contributing members of society. And to end this, I would say what we need is a concerted action, a solidarity as mentioned by some other speakers. So the brothers collaborate with the concerted action of educators, parents, and other professional bodies whose purpose is the cultural, social, and technical development of the country. They try to involve the young in this work. While fulfilling their mission as educators, the brothers manifest their solidarity with all those struggling for justice. That's our Constitution number 92. Thank you very much, and I hope you have enjoyed this conference as I do, and we'll see more of it tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic. We all enjoyed it. You had your very characteristic way of presenting it. You brought home to us the Montfortian legacy from his writings, from our traditions, from our role of life, from our general chapter documents. Thank you, and those 6 very important competencies that we need to develop for the future. Being resilient and nimble, the ability to rush the social skills necessary, the ability to communicate effectively, and the importance of transiting to the digital platform that is the platform of the future, and concerted action on behalf of those whom the world rejects. I think it was a very beautiful presentation. Hopefully we will be getting all these papers. We intend to bring out a book with all these papers. I am requesting all the speakers to send me their presentation so that we can really publish it, because these interventions are of great importance, especially as it comes from the times of the pandemic. So thank you very much, Dominic.